Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us again on the Lights Too Bright podcast. For those of you who are just joining us, or even if you're coming back, please do like, share, and follow. Today, I'm fortunate enough to have joining me a friend who, as with many friends in optometry, was a friend of a friend, and now is a friend. He is a partner in a fabulous independent practice in Herefordshire and works with or used to work, I guess, with one of the potentially scariest men in the profession. And if you've been examined by him, you know what I mean. So I would like to say hello and welcome to Mr. Nicholas Black. Hi, Nick.
Hi, Kaya. Thanks very much for having me on.
No, mate, I really appreciate you taking the time. I know it's busy, and you know you've got a lot of clinics and stuff going on. I've actually never asked, are you a Nick or are you a Nicholas?
It depends if I'm in trouble or not. But yeah, my mother taught me to respond to most names. So
Okay, most names. So there's more.
there's definitely more, yes. But yeah, Nick is generally the one that I most
Okay, fantastic. And let's start with what you do. I alluded to it, but what do you do at the moment, Nick?
well, I work at BBR Optometry, and my skill set in clinical capacity is I'm a contact lens optician, dealing with a lot of complex hospital um, contact lenses, um, and also I have a low vision specialty. So I tend to focus in on those two when I'm in clinic, but I also wrap up my time being in general dispensing, helping people through their journey from the examination room to, choosing fabulous spectacles that deliver um, what they need when they need it, and also being chief exec and a director in a practice with 26 employees, helping keeping people pointing in the right direction. So I wear different hats on different days, and I enjoy the different aspects that optometry and clinical practice throw at us each day.
I mean that I knew the team was big, but I didn't know it was 26. So we're at like 10, including me. So you guys are more than, you're double the size of TKNS. I didn't realize actually.
Yeah, it does take a huge amount of effort, but we've got a great team around us,
Yeah.
and we have lots of people who are involved in different elements of the practice to support and engage with that. So although I'm chief exec, I do a finite part of all that, and without the team around us, no, definitely, it would be much more than a full time job for any one person just to keep everything pointing in that one direction. Which, as you know, as a practice, that teamwork and energy in the practice is what makes a real difference for the people coming in.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'll get back to the practice because I've got a few questions about transitions and things like that, which you've obviously done um, from when you started. But let's go back to the beginning. That's obviously not a Hereford accent. Where is home? Where did you kind of grow up? Did you want to be an eyes? When.
Yeah, it is quite a funny story. I mean, we all have interesting journeys along the way. I'm a Kiwi, so I spent the first 23 years of my life in New Zealand, in and around Wellington, and jumping the ditch between the two islands. My father was a dispensing optician. My grandfather was a an optometrist, um, and so I grew up with optics um, in and around the family. My brother had sort of after school jobs working in the practice and doing bits and pieces. And so we knew what optics was, although I sort of enjoyed what was involved. It was never really a planned strategy to get involved.
Okay.
One of the reason, probably the key reason, is as a third generation, we were brought up from a young age with my father often telling us, first generation makes it, second generation consolidates it, third generation squanders it. And so
It's everything.
So it was sort of never on the cards, because it's sort of been conditioned that, look, he loved what he did, my granddad loved what he did, but actually it's a poison chalice for you, don't go there. And as we grew up, went through education, it was very much like, well, no one's going to go into it. And so I got to do my A levels and didn't know what I wanted to do at that sort of age, 17, 18, didn't know. And in New Zealand, you have quite a different education system for university, where a lot of the courses are only done at a handful of universities.
Okay.
Optometry in those days was actually under the umbrella of psychology, because
Okay.
it wasn't big enough for its own faculty.
Department. Yeah.
And so there was only 20 places a year in one university. And so with medicine, engineering, optometry, and there would have been others as well, you often did what was called an intermediate, where you could do a first year anywhere, and then they would select people to do it. And being someone who was a bit of a pleaser of other people, that was sort of the relationship that I had with my parents. It had gone through a separation, divorce. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I went off and did this intermediate, which I thought I'd get the monkey off my back. I wasn't dedicated enough to be one of the 17 undergraduates a year, so I thought, oh, that's good. I'll do it. Then I'll never be asked again. That's fine. So I did my first year degree, didn't get selected for optometry, so I was like, yep, that's perfect, and went on and did psychology. So
Okay.
I did my psychology degree, and then finished that. Still didn't know what I wanted to do, and a big recession, the end of 80s, beginning of 90s in New Zealand. So I ended up working in an optical lab for about 18 months, just sort of glazing, surfacing, things like that. And I quite enjoyed that dynamic of, I was on the phone a lot to the optometrists, dispensing opticians, checking details, things like that. And then I wanted to do my big OE. I mean, everyone from New Zealand wants to get away from, a country that's the most remote in the world, and see what life is like. And, Australia's no different. So going to Australia wasn't really on the cards. And so at 21, I decided what I wanted to do was go traveling. And my parents got me a one-way ticket for my 21st. Okay. And so,
If that's not a hint, Nick, I don't know. I don't know what is.
yeah. And there is logic in it, because a one-way ticket returns only valid for 12 months. So there was no point in having a return ticket. And in those days, you had to have about £1,800 in your bank account when you arrived in Britain.
Okay.
To show that you could
afford to live there and
exist.
stuff. Yeah.
And so, so I came over, and before I'd come over, I'd sort of spoken to my dad, and I knew I was working, and he's like, well, why don't you think about dispensing optician? I've been dispensing, you could do training. And so I'd been put in contact with Abdo, and so they had said, well, you've got a science degree, so we can probably give you some credits towards that. And they then gave me the contacts of 3 companies that were there, prominent employers of correspondence course in the early 90s. And so I contacted them, and I arrived in 1993, and within a week I had a job with Rayner Opticians as a dispensing optician trainee, and was on a train heading up to the metropolis of Huddersfield in Yorkshire.
So where's Rayner based?
So Rayner at the time became about the fourth biggest chain in Britain, and they had a really strong training background. So a number of people that we interact with have come through the Rayner sort of journey, and they did tend to be a great training platform, but they didn't retain that talent. A lot of the people that came through it had greater ambition or desire to own their own or be their own boss, and so moved on to other pastures. And then about probably 15 years ago now, it sort of was sold off in fractions to
VE, wasn't
Scrivens,
it?
to Vision Express and things like that.
Yeah.
But they had about 140 practices across quite a few in Yorkshire, Wales, the Midlands.
So where were you based when you arrived then?
Well, I got off the airplane and jumped on a bus to Birmingham, and then had an interview in Rugby. That seemed a good place to go for an interview, and I'm coming from New Zealand. And so then they got me a job. So I just put my pack on my back and turned up at the practice and had to find my way from there.
Nice. So is it still a 2-year? Was it like a same as the Abdo courses now, where you're in placement and then you take a couple of weeks out every year and do your ongoing assessments?
Yes, absolutely. So it was a 3-year correspondence course at that point, which it still is now, with your block release and then your final exams at the end.
Nice. So you did that. You got qualified. Then you followed your peers out of. How long did you stick around with Rayner then before you then stepped away?
I did enjoy Rayners. I mean, and there was a good cohort of people that we're working with, and it did give some great values and core skills, which I use all the time. Once I'd been with Rayners, I was sort of accelerated through into manager sort of a store. Okay. So I moved after a year, I moved to Fleetwood, and I was sort of a student up there. And then I went to Wrexham, and I was a manager of the Wrexham store. And then after about 12 months, I moved to St Helens, where I was more there for a longer period of time as manager.
Okay.
And while I was there, the contact lens industry or component to care was changing. In the late 90s, we were seeing more of the frequent replacement lenses come on the market. Keyur one-day lenses were just arriving, and so there was a culture shift in terms of the Rayner plan of actually how are we going to engage with contact lenses. And so at that point, they put me through the contact lens course.
Okay.
So, and this is something, a thread that sort of runs through my sort of belief and relationship with staff is, understanding what are your aspirations and the company aspirations, because at the time that I had contact lenses, it wasn't particularly on my radar. But they could see the way that things were changing, and they were like, well, we think you've got the skills to do that. We would be happy to support you. And so things like appraisals and stuff, that they become really important, but it's a two-way street. And sometimes maybe you don't know what your next step might be and someone else does. And that was definitely a case for me, where they encouraged me to look at that. I didn't necessarily see that in myself, and so
Fantastic.
so I so I did the contact lens abdo course, which was challenging. It was a huge undertaking, sort of in a time commitment. I had just had my first born arrive. You know, it it was it was a commitment that uh, required a lot of input and challenge. So yeah, I did that, and then I'd been working with them for about 3 years as a mobile contact lens optician full time, and young family. And at that time, we were living in St Helens in the northwest, which is a nice town, but it didn't maybe have um, that sort of aspect that I'd envisaged of from my childhood for my kids. And out of the blue, when I wasn't looking, I saw a job advert for Hereford and being in the wilds. Well, I'd spend a little bit of time in Herefordshire with family, so I'd sort of seen its charms, and at that point, it's like, what have I got to lose? The kids are young. Uh, it's a different opportunity, and from where I was as a full time contact lens optician, I actually took quite a big step backwards to be a
Okay.
dispensing optician only, to not be practice manager or so. So having been practice manager, contact lens optician full time, I was now just back in a team, working in an optometry based practice, which did all the exams, all the contact lenses, and the framework for me to do contact lenses wasn't there. But that's one of the best decisions I made, and and I think sometimes we always think we have to take a step forward, or step up to go forward, and that's not always the case. Sometimes if you look at the opportunities, that there's 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 different steps and different opportunities, and I I saw that as as an opportunity of moving out of a multiple into an independent practice, and having grown up with an independent practice and seeing the benefits of that, and having an aspiration to one day become an owner. I just saw that as a step to understand it. And as it happened, there was two senior optometrists that were getting older that before long stepped back. Um, so opportunities presented with when it was Bishop and Rumney in those days, for me, and it was I thought that was going to be a stepping stone to maybe something else. Suddenly, it just opened up in front of me as an opportunity.
I think sometimes all of us do it. Yeah, and you're right. Sometimes we're always looking at going forward, to make a change or sidestepping slightly. But if if the correct position appears, a slight step back can have a huge benefit, career wise. I mean, I went back to the States and I had to do 2 years of school and, all this kind of stuff, and cost me an arm and a leg. But professionally, it, really, I'm so much better for it professionally rather than just plodding along, in a situation where I wasn't professionally happy. And you have to do it. And I think sometimes people get a bit scared by that. I just want to diversify just a little bit, because so where did you meet, like, your wife? Is she from New Zealand as well, or did you meet her here? And does that make sense? Because I never ever asked you, actually. I'm like, I know you're married, I know you got kids, but I came from New Zealand, I arrived, I studied, I'm having a kid. I'm like, okay, so at what point did your partner get involved in this?
Well, when I moved to St Helens, I inherited became manager of a practice that had a dispensing optician in training.
Okay.
And um, we became firm friends. And because we became firm friends, I got to go to his house, and I met his sister. Um, and so, yeah, so um, eh,
So
that's
you're
how.
all rugby union and she's all rugby league.
Yes, yeah, and he was a rugby league. Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. It just, I thought, I've actually never asked Nick this. Okay, fine. That's really interesting.
So I have two of my children were born in Billinge, which is in Wigan.
Okay.
So yeah, very much rugby league. St Helens, Wigan. Yeah, um, and yeah, went to a few games. Did enjoy that part of the world. And
I think people, for those, if anyone's listening to this or watching this who's not from England, it it can be really different. You can be different parts, and I guess it's like everywhere. Different parts of the country are so different everywhere, from accent, outlook on life. You know, you have some parts of this country where everyone is just smiley all the time. And you have other parts of the country where everyone just looks like they're angry all the time. They're not necessarily angry all the time. They're just trying to get somewhere in a rush. So I always find it fascinating that, I think of Britain as quite small, but it's not. And it is so big and it's so diverse. And we're very fortunate. I think we're very fortunate in that diversity. So,
and
okay.
can I add
Yeah,
on
now go
that?
on.
Is that was part of how I got integrated into Britain. It was because is by moving to all these different places. It was a great advantage to me and a privilege to work in all these different places because they are so different. And you go from one village to another, and the way people speak or the terminology that they use is all different. And people have always been so receptive, um, to me. I've been fortunate enough that wherever I've gone, I've been welcomed. Uh, and it's been a privilege to sort of work in all these different places and sort of get immersed into those.
Yeah, yeah. It's you have a bit of a you are fortunate enough, mate, that you're quite likable. So I think that helps. I mean, I think that's bearing on it. I mean, if you were a bit more abrasive, then that might not have gone down so well. But again, to your point there, I do think it's important professionally if you can move around. I do think that really helps. I think we get a lot of professionals now. You've probably seen it when I'm going to get onto management and stuff like that. But you've seen it now where people very much want to be where they are, and they're not prepared to maybe step away. I talked to a couple of people who are involved with pre-reg and things like that, and they find that people are not prepared to travel, and that is a shame, I think, because the learning experience of not necessarily cultures, but you know what I mean, different communities is probably a better way of describing it. There is so much to gain from that, and so much to learn from that. Positive and negative, I guess. And it is a shame we don't travel a bit more.
And I absolutely agree. And as an employer, it has been a challenge over in different pockets of time. Attracting people to the practice, and being somewhere that's in a rural. Although we work in a city, we're relatively rural and not near a major city. There has been a frustration sometimes that you've got opportunities in lots of different places, and sometimes individuals maybe don't uh, fully appreciate some of these opportunities, even if it's short term. That how you can shape and grow um, to become a better practitioner and individual. Um, And uh, we we have an environment where there's a strong uh, what's the word, recruitment society, and and yet people that reach out and do that work themselves come across much more favorably as an employer, because you're thinking actually they want to engage with us. And so there is an element from dispensing opticians, optometrists, how they want to expand their skills and, um, you know, reach out and do a bit of that, that dog work, and, yourself, and you'll be seen better for it.
Yeah. Talking about expanding skills then, thank you for that. That's a lovely segue into my next question. How did so what happened then? So did you then end up did you go into low vision, or did you kind of persuade them to create a more of a contact lens optician role within BBR? How did that segment happen?
So the low vision arm came first. When I was in St Helens, we had a low vision contract at the local hospital. So I started being involved with low vision, um, and so you'd sort of develop those skills, although they weren't formalised. And when I moved to BBR, they had an established low vision service, which was only run by optometrists across Herefordshire. Herefordshire was the first community low vision service in the UK, which was in either 1994 or 1995. Nick Rumney set that up. Obviously, he's got a strong interest in low vision, and that sort of came from his part of his times out in Australia. And so um, they built this pilot in Herefordshire, which took off, and it sort of just it ticked along, and it became the basis of what Barbara Ryan and others, expanded and enhanced for the Welsh service, which became known as globally as the gold standard of low vision service. But the basis was in Hereford, and when I first moved to Hereford, it was like, well, you have all these skills, and if we use you, then we can save optometrist time. If we think back 25 years or a bit more, um, you know, the optometrist wasn't maybe doing the full scope they weren't doing the full scope of practices that they do today. But by me taking some of the low vision work, it meant that there was expansion or utilization of the optometrist, and in a different sort of cost base, a bit like we use CLOs in practice all over the place. They deliver a skill which frees time for optometrists, and now with all the other services that are involved, like you're massive into your IP and glaucoma and all those other expansion of skills. It's like, well, the optometrists, if they keep expanding and expanding, they've got to be able to distribute some of these other things to others. Otherwise, there's no time to do everything.
Yeah, and you'll know this as well as I do, because we've talked about this, and providing services, what optometrists want to do, being clinically acute is what optometrists really, I think, well, the optometrists I tend to hang out with, that's what they really want to do. And the CLOs want to be able to provide the best products. People are looking to develop, but also ultimately you have to be able to pay the bills. And sometimes the clinical stuff that doesn't pay the bills, because particularly if you are stuck in a contract by the NHS, there can be severe limitations in terms of funding. So you do have to think about how to best manage your time and your assets to make sure that you are cost effective and able to pay the bills, because you've got to keep the lights on. And you can't, charitable work unfortunately doesn't keep the lights on, and you have to get that balance right.
Absolutely. I mean, and there is a balance between attracting enough people, um, and uh, sometimes there will be a viability of well, we can tolerate some aspect if it brings some return in other ways. But as a business, you're absolutely right. If it's not viable, it's not sustainable. So if we want to be a business that's there tomorrow, we've got to make sure we can deliver. And the other part of being an independent practice is that those people that you work with, you have become a family, and those people and their families are dependent on you being um, profitable, successful, and sustainable. Because if you're not around tomorrow, then their future is uncertain as well.
So that's a very valid point. I think sometimes we overlook it. We get, some of us, myself included, at points so caught up in our, well, I want to be clinically X, Y, and Z, that you don't think about the grand scheme, and that's changed. When did you become a partner within BBR? When did that happen? Was that something when you joined, you went, this is my long-term goal? Was that something they went, you know what, Nick, we like you, you're a good guy, why don't you come and help us along this journey? Does that make sense? Was it an invite, or you more going, come on guys, I'll be good at this?
Yeah, it was a process, and probably immediately it wasn't an obvious opening. It was an aspiration that I had, and I vocalized that to Nick, but it was some time before we realized the actual um, shareholding change. But I moved there in 2002, and in 2005 I became a director. So I became a director with no financial input.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
because Nick at that point was sole owner of the whole organisation, having transitioned from the previous owners in the partnership. And so in 2007, we made those decisions that I became a shareholder with him. So uh, so I've spent the last 20 years as a co-director, but not quite 20 years as a shareholder now. And uh, it does change your perspective. Being a director was, obviously a responsibility, and uh, um, but actually having skin in the game changes that aspect as well. And so it's quite interesting to have actually had both roles, and and now we have the transition. We've got a new team around us, going forward from this year. So there's now 5 of us um, working with HG in the practice, and and so we're learning a different dynamic, which is great fun, but it's an investment of time and energy and learning how we get the best out of each other.
Yeah. And it, yeah, I don't know what to say. It is tough. You want to like the people you work with, and it helps, and to have a rapport builds time. So I can understand. I think similarly, when I first joined Brian as a locum, the conversation was, my long-term goal is to be my own boss. My long-term goal is not to be employed. I need to have some skin in the game, as you so uh, well put it. Took a couple of years of, initially I was and that was when I went in as a locum. And then we got there, and then they looked to change the business. And then that was my entry point into the business, and things like that. But I think if that's something that you want, I think it's important that I think it's kind of important that you let people know that you want it. Otherwise, people won't know, and they'll just assume that you're happy where you are.
And I think you raise a great point there. And things like appraisals and development are really vital within an organization, and some people fear appraisals. They think, oh, it's a negative, but I just see them as a massive positive. I really want to understand what's going on, what's making this individual tick, what are their aspirations, and how do we get the best out of them and for them and for the business. And very occasionally over the last couple of 20 odd years, an appraisal has been an instigator to say, look, we're not a perfect match. If you have honest, real conversations, it can be productive for lots of different reasons. And for those people who we've identified that maybe they've got other things and other challenges which are maybe more important, or different aspirations that are better suited outside of the organization, then we've seen people go to some great places. And training, I'm a real training advocate, and we have training contracts for all staff that undergo things like IP. We're putting all the dispensing opticians through the pediatric dispensing course. Clinical assistants do training, and we want these individuals to be the best individuals they can be, because that gives us better engagement, better, more enjoyable job for them, and better interactions with our patients to keep raising the game. Because if we just think we're already made it, then we're already on the decline. You've got to keep looking forward and investing the skills and training and equipment and everything else.
Thank you. That has been great. Dude, we're about to crack 40 minutes, so we're doing well. I've got 2 questions for you, right? And then our first one, actually, I'm like, so you got a lot of hats, depending on the day of the week. What would you say do you have a favorite? Is there something like, something that you really have found is actually, if I could do this more, I would do more of this?
I think I do really enjoy the complex contact lenses, the keratoconics, or the blackout cosmetics, things like that transform lives. You've got people that have been in tears because you have given them back something that they have not had, or the low vision. And it is so empowering when you see someone get something that means so much to them. And I think we're in a privileged position, and you see it in lots of different areas of practice. And that's where I see it, and other people see it when they do different things. But particularly for the contact lenses, when you've got people who are keratoconic and they have no functional vision with any other optical device other than a contact lens, and you give them something that just they can function, their world illuminates again. It is great.
I agree. And it's one thing that we as optometrists, and I speak obviously from an optometrist background, is something that you're essentially trained to do from the go. With dispensing opticians, slightly different in that you have to go through the CLO program, but you're trained to do it. You don't have to do further diplomas. You can, and all that kind of additional stuff is great, but you've got the skill set. And for me, it came mainly from, I didn't do any additional stuff. It was just like, right, well, you're in practice, let's do it. And that hands-on experience really helped broaden my education in that field, because prior to working with Brian, I wasn't doing it very much. And then I kind of got launched into it because Brian did it, and someone had to help him out or see his patients when he wasn't in the building. So I agree with you. That stuff that makes people go, "Oh wow, so I am allowed to drive now." Well, yeah, if with your contact lenses in, yeah, you can drive. And that the truly life changing stuff on those invisible disabilities that people like to, they like call it those invisible disabilities where you don't necessarily see something. That is great. And then the last one, as with all of my guests, if you're going to give some advice to a peer colleague, life advice, professional advice, I don't know, is there anything that you would say to them that you'd go, you know what, this is a good piece of advice, take this to heart, it will help?
I think probably is we can often get focused on salary as a motivator. And I think really look at your own skills. And if you want to invest in yourself, what gaps of skills do you want to develop and drive, and where might you get them? Okay, because um, if you widen your base to be the best person in those areas that you're really interested in, you'll then accelerate through wherever you need to be to get to your places that one will make you happy and that will deliver a better return.
That's great, because no one's actually come at it like that before, and that's really nice that you've said that. And I can appreciate it just based on life and stuff, but sometimes hearing other people say it really kind of enforces that develop yourself, and the salaries and things like that should, fingers crossed, follow in appropriate. So I'm going to leave it there, mate. I really appreciate you taking the time, and I would just like to thank you very much, and fingers crossed I'll see you in December.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and always wonderful to chat to you. Thanks very much.
Thanks, mate.